There are moments when heaven comes close enough for a man to feel eternity breathing. Not in dreams, not in imagination, but in terrifying, undeniable reality. Israel had seen power. They had seen the sea split. They had seen Egypt collapse. They had seen bread fall from heaven and water come from stone. They had seen miracles that should have anchored their faith forever. But miracles introduce you to God's power. They do not automatically introduce you to His presence. And now God was calling them higher. They arrived at the base of a mountain unlike any they had seen before. Sinai rose from the earth like a throne carved in stone, silent, immovable, watching. The air felt different there, heavy, sacred, dangerous. Because some places on earth are not meant to make you comfortable, they are meant to make you aware. God spoke to Moses and gave him instructions that would separate the ordinary from the holy. The people were to consecrate themselves. They were to prepare. They were to recognize that they were not approaching a mountain. They were approaching God. Days passed in tension. The camp waited. The mountain stood in silence. And then heaven descended. Thunder shattered the sky. Lightning tore across the heavens like living fire. Smoke rose from the mountain as if the earth itself had begun to burn. The ground trembled beneath their feet. This was not symbolic. This was not poetic. This was real. The Creator was descending into His creation. The sound of a trumpet filled the air, growing louder and louder, not blown by human breath, but by heaven itself. It was a sound that carried authority, a sound that announced the arrival of the eternal. The people trembled, not because they were weak, because they were human. Holiness reveals the distance between God and man, and Moses walked toward it, not because he was fearless, but because he was called. Every step up that mountain was a step away from everything familiar. Every step upward was a surrender of control. The sounds of thunder grew louder, the smoke grew thicker, the air grew hotter, and still he climbed. Because intimacy with God always requires leaving something behind. At the top of the mountain, Moses entered the cloud. He disappeared from human sight, but he did not disappear from God. There, in the fire and the cloud, Moses encountered the living presence of the eternal God. This was not the distant voice of the burning bush. This was not instruction from afar. This was closeness. God spoke, not to a nation, to a man. Words were given that would shape civilizations, words carved not into sand, but into stone. Commandments not born from human philosophy, but from divine authority. These were not suggestions, they were revelation. They revealed the heart of God. They revealed the structure of righteousness. They revealed what it meant for humanity to live in alignment with heaven. Moses received them in silence, in awe, in surrender. Time passed differently in that presence. Days became weeks, weeks stretched into 40 days and 40 nights. Below, the people waited. At first, they waited with reverence, then with uncertainty, then with fear, and finally with impatience. Because humanity struggles to trust what it cannot see. Their leader was gone. The mountain still burned. The voice had grown silent. And in that silence, doubt began to grow. They turned to Aaron. Make us a God who will go before us. Not because God had failed, because waiting had tested their hearts. They took their gold, the same gold Egypt had given them when they left,
the same gold that symbolized their deliverance, and they melted it, they shaped it, they formed it into a calf, a god they could see, a god they could control, a god that required no faith. This was not just disobedience, this was betrayal. At the very moment Moses was receiving the law from God, the people were breaking it. At the very moment intimacy was happening on the mountain, corruption was happening below it. And God saw. He spoke to Moses, not with calm, with grief. They have corrupted themselves. In a single moment, the joy of revelation collided with the pain of rejection. God spoke of judgment, of justice, of consequences, because holiness does not ignore sin. But Moses did something unexpected. He interceded. He stood between God and the people. He reminded God of his promise. He pleaded for mercy. Not because the people deserved it, because they needed it. This was the transformation. Moses was no longer the man arguing with God out of fear. He was now the man standing before God out of love. Love for a people who had betrayed him. Love for a people who had broken his heart. Love for a people who did not understand the cost of their calling. Intercession is born when intimacy replaces ambition. God listened. Mercy was given. Justice was restrained. And Moses descended the mountain. In his hands were the tablets of stone, written by God, carrying the law of heaven. But as he descended, he saw it, the dancing, the celebration, the idol, the betrayal made visible. The sound of their rebellion filled the air, and something inside Moses broke. Not his calling, his heart. The tablets fell from his hands. They shattered on the ground, the physical reflection of what had already happened spiritually. The covenant had been broken. The people stood exposed before holiness. Consequences followed, because mercy does not erase responsibility, but mercy always leaves room for restoration.
Moses returned to the mountain again, not as a messenger receiving instruction, but as an intercessor seeking restoration. Again he entered the presence of God. Again he stood in the fire. Again he chose intimacy over distance. And God did something extraordinary. He allowed his glory to pass before Moses. Not fully, because no man could survive that, but enough. Enough to mark him forever. Enough to change him. Enough to transform him. When Moses descended the mountain again, something was different. Not in his clothing, not in his posture, in his face. It was shining, not reflecting sunlight, reflecting glory. The invisible had left visible evidence. The presence of God had left its mark on human flesh. He did not know it. Others saw it first. They were afraid, not of Moses, of what he carried. Because when a man truly encounters God, he does not remain the same. You cannot carry glory and remain ordinary. You cannot stand in eternity and remain untouched. You cannot walk in divine presence and remain unchanged. Moses had entered the mountain as a man carrying responsibility. He descended as a man carrying presence. This was the difference. Power performs miracles. Presence transforms identity.
The deliverer of Israel was no longer just a leader shaped by calling. He was now a vessel shaped by intimacy. He had seen fire. He had heard the voice. He had carried the law. He had stood in glory. And that glory now rested on him. Not because he was perfect, because he was surrendered. Because intimacy with God does not belong to the strongest, it belongs to the closest. And as he stood before the people, face shining with evidence of eternity, Israel saw something they had never seen before. Not just a man marked by God. He went up as a man, he came down carrying the presence of God.
But this story is not just about Moses. It is about proximity. Because there is a difference between seeing what God does and becoming someone who knows Him. Israel saw the fire. They heard the thunder. They witnessed the glory. But they stayed at the bottom of the mountain. Only one man climbed. And the question is not whether God is speaking. The question is, how far are you willing to go? Because intimacy has a cost. It will ask you to leave comfort. It will ask you to leave noise. It will ask you to leave the need for control. Most people want the evidence of God without the process of meeting Him. They want the glory without the climbing. But Moses shows us something deeper. The fire is not the goal. The presence is. And that presence is not reserved for a man on a mountain. It is an invitation to you. So if your life feels ordinary, if your faith feels distant, if God feels far away, maybe the answer is not more activity. Maybe the answer is ascent. Step by step, moment by moment, choosing Him over everything else. Because the ones who carry glory are not the ones who saw it from a distance. They are the ones who came close enough to be changed. And if you are willing, there is still a mountain. There is still a voice. There is still a presence waiting to be encountered.